The security alarm went off exactly at 5 in the morning, a short, sharp sound enough to tear through the stillness of dawn in the mountains. I opened my eyes at once, not startled, not panicked. I just lay there, staring at the familiar wooden ceiling where the dim early light was slipping in through the crack of the window. The phone on the bedside table vibrated immediately after. "I'm sorry to call so early, ma'am." The guard's voice sounded tense. "Your daughter-in-law has just arrived. She came with a moving truck, and 3 strangers." I sat up and put on my robe. My voice was strangely calm. "What did she say?" She said you no longer live here, that this house now belongs to her." I was silent for a few seconds, not out of surprise, but because I was rearranging everything in my head. Outside, I could already hear the heavy truck grinding over the gravel, car doors slamming shut, and a familiar woman's voice ringing out with confidence, as if this place had belonged to her for a long time. "Do you want me to call the police?" the guard asked, hesitantly. "Not yet," I replied softly. "Let her come in. Make sure to record her full name, the time she arrived, and the reason for her visit." The call ended. I set the phone down and took a sip of the cold tea that had been left over from the night before. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't beat any faster. Because deep down, I had known this moment would come sooner or later. She thought this was the end. But for me, this was only where the truth began. If you're listening to this story while it's still dark out, or in a quiet moment of your own, I invite you to stay. Subscribe to the channel to listen with us to stories about family, justice, and respect for older people. You're not listening alone. Now, back to that morning. Before that morning, my life was straightforward. I had been retired for over a year, having spent 30 years teaching biology at a small high school. When I stepped away from the classroom, I didn't feel empty the way people often say they do. I just felt light. Light because I no longer had to chase the school bell, nor did I have to bring tests home every night. This mountain house was where I chose to slow down and take a break. Not big, not luxurious, but quiet enough to clearly hear the wind moving through the pine forest each morning. I was used to waking up early, brewing a pot of tea, and carrying it out to the back porch to watch the mist slowly lift from the treetops. Some mornings I did nothing at all, just sat there, letting my mind be empty for a while. During the day, I gardened, not because I needed to save money, but because I liked the feeling of touching the soil. Planting a few rows of vegetables, some wildflowers, and caring for them every day made time pass in a very natural way. I read in the afternoons, usually old books I had read long ago, rereading them not to find out what happens, but to remember who I used to be. Evenings were the quietest time in the house. I cooked for one, set one place, and washed one set of dishes. Some nights I turned on the radio to listen to the news. Other nights I didn't. I was used to that silence. In fact, I thought I was. But there was something I had never told anyone. Some nights, after turning off all the lights, I would sit in the kitchen a little longer. Not because I wasn't sleepy, but because the house was too quiet. So quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking, the wood contracting as the temperature dropped. I wasn't afraid, I just felt empty. Eating dinner alone isn't hard, but eating dinner alone night after night for months can sometimes make a person wonder, am I missing something? Even so, I never thought of myself as weak. I could take care of myself. I still drove into town every week and still remembered every bill and every appointment. I didn't need anyone to look after me, but I valued the relationships that remained in my life, especially the one with my son. My son's name is Evan. He was a gentle child from a very young age. When he was in school, he often came home with injured birds or skinny, stray cats, asking if we could keep them for a few days. As he grew up, that part of him remained essentially unchanged. Evan trusts people. He always believes that if he treats others kindly, they will treat him the same way. When Evan became an adult, we stayed in regular contact, not the kind where a mother and son call each other every day, but calls long enough to know the other person was doing well. He usually called me on weekends, talking about work, about hiking trips, about small, ordinary details of his life. I listened more than I advised. I always believed that once a child is grown, what they need is not instructions, but a place where they can speak freely. Evan still visited me often. Every time he came, he helped with minor repairs around the house, splitting firewood, checking the porch before winter. We cooked together, ate slowly, and talked without rushing. I cherished those moments, not because of the help, but because they made me feel I was still part of my son's life. But Evan had one weakness that always worried me, even though I never said it out loud. He was too ready to believe that the person beside him always had good intentions. When he loved someone, he loved completely, holding nothing back. He wasn't used to suspicion, and he wasn't good at recognizing what people hide behind pleasant words. I used to think that was a virtue, and in many situations, it truly is. But I also understood that trust, when placed in the wrong hands, can blind a person. My son always believed that love alone was enough to protect someone. I just never imagined that this very belief would become the path leading to what was about to happen. Evan told me about her during a phone call in late spring. His voice was different, brighter, with a hint of excitement I hadn't heard in a long time. He said he had met someone, and that this time things felt serious. Her name was Lena. The first time Lena came up to the mountain with Evan, I prepared dinner, as usual. Nothing fancy, just the dishes Evan had loved since childhood. When they arrived, I stepped out onto the porch to greet them, and I had to admit that my first impression of Lena was pretty good. She was polite, well-spoken, and knew when to smile and when to listen. Everything seemed just right, almost too flawless to criticize, and that was precisely why I began to pay attention. While Evan was busy carrying things inside, Lena stood in the living room looking around for a long time, not with the curious glances of a first-time guest, but with a slow, methodical gaze, as if she were memorizing the position of every object. She asked me about the house, how long I had lived there, and whether the winters were brutal. The question sounded perfectly normal. Then she asked, "This house must be quite valuable, right? Especially with a location like this." The way she said it wasn't rude. It even came with a faint smile. However, I noticed that the question lacked any sense of wonder or appreciation, only evaluation. During dinner, Lena behaved properly. She complimented the food, praised the quiet atmosphere, and said I took good care of the house. But every time Evan stood up to refill his water or stepped outside to take a phone call, her eyes swept across the corners of the room once again. I said nothing. I simply remembered. When Evan returned, Lena placed her hand over his and said that this place was truly ideal for settling down long term. The word settling was spoken very lightly, as if by accident. Evan smiled. I remained silent. That evening, as they were getting ready to leave, Lena turned back to look at the house one more time before stepping out the door. Not with affection, but the way someone looks at something already included in their plans. I walked them to the car and said goodbye like any ordinary mother. Not cold, not overly warm. When the car disappeared down the slope, I stood on the porch for a long time. I didn't draw any conclusions that night. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking, that I shouldn't judge someone based on a few glances and a few words. But from that day on, I became more careful about what I heard and what I saw. Some things don't need to be understood right away. They only need to be remembered. Everything happened faster than I expected. Just a few months after the first meeting, Evan called me and said that the two of them had decided to get married. He spoke happily, but there was something hurried in his voice, as if he were afraid I might ask too many questions. I didn't ask. I congratulated my son because I knew there were things that, no matter how worried a mother may be, she cannot stop. The wedding was simple and neat, precisely the kind Lena liked. Everything looked perfectly fine. Evan looked at her with the eyes of someone who believed he had found a safe place. I smiled, stood beside my son, and fulfilled the role of a mother. After the wedding, the phone calls began to thin out. Before, Evan used to call me on weekends. Now, a week would pass, then 2. When he did call, he still asked about me, still sounded polite, but the conversations were shorter. He spoke quickly, as if squeezing time in. At times, I had the feeling that what he was saying didn't entirely come from his own thoughts. "You should think about preparing for the future," Evan said during one call. "I mean, so things won't get complicated later." That didn't sound like Evan. He had never spoken that way before. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then simply replied that I was fine. I began to wonder if I was being too sensitive. Was I trying to find problems where there were none? I didn't want to become the kind of mother who always feels abandoned when her child gets married. I had seen that in many other families, and I didn't want to repeat it, so I said nothing more. I reminded myself that Evan now had his own life, that this distance was natural. But deep down, I knew something had changed, and it hadn't come from time or physical distance. It came from words that no longer sounded the same. The changes didn't come all at once. They came little by little, small enough that if you didn't pay attention, you might think it was just ordinary concern. Lena started calling me more often than Evan did. At first, it was just to check in, asking how the weather was on the mountain, whether my joints ached when it got cold. Her voice was gentle and polite, nothing to complain about. Then one day she said, "I think living up here alone can be a bit inconvenient. Have you ever considered using a medical alert bracelet? Just in case you fall or something unexpected happens." I replied that I was still healthy and had never had any accidents. She laughed and said she was just being cautious. I let it go. A few weeks later, Lena came to visit me by herself. She brought pastries, tea, and a neatly clipped stack of papers in her bag. While I was boiling water, she placed the papers on the kitchen table, as if they had always been there. "They're just a few simple documents," she said, "so Evan can help you handle some small matters. That way you won't have to worry about them." I picked them up to look. The text was dense, full of terms I wasn't familiar with. I didn't understand everything, but it was enough to know this wasn't something to sign in a hurry. I said I needed time. Lena didn't seem annoyed. She just nodded, smiled, and told me to think it over carefully. After that, the conversations always circled back to the same topics: my health, my age, my future. Lena never said outright that I was no longer capable of taking care of myself, but she always spoke as if that day was bound to come. One afternoon, after I'd just finished gardening and was utterly exhausted, Lena placed that stack of papers in front of me again. I remember that moment very clearly. I sat down, picked up the pen, and for a brief second, a thought crossed my mind. Just sign it so everything will be peaceful. I stopped, not because I fully understood the documents, but because I realized that what I was feeling at that moment wasn't trust. It was fatigue, and I knew that any decision made in that state would not be a good one. I put the pen down. I said that I wasn't ready today. Lena was silent for a few seconds. Her smile was still there, but it wasn't as soft as before. She gathered the papers and said she would come back when I felt more comfortable. When she left, the kitchen became strangely quiet. I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty spot where the papers had been. At that moment, I no longer thought this was just a concern. I began to understand that some forms of concern, when repeated often enough, turn into pressure. I realized the first change didn't come from Lena, but from the people around me. One morning, while I was watering the garden, I saw my neighbor driving past. We usually greeted each other, even if it was just a nod or a wave from a distance. That day, she looked at me, hesitated for a moment, then turned her face away. The car drove on without stopping. I stood there, still holding the hose, wondering if I had done something to make someone uncomfortable. A few days later, I went into town to run errands. At the familiar store, the cashier who used to ask about my garden only exchanged a few polite words before looking down at the counter. When I asked about her child, she answered briefly and turned away. Nothing rude, but the closeness was gone. It wasn't until I overheard a conversation at the post office that I understood. Two women standing nearby were talking quietly enough to seem private, but loudly enough for me to hear. They said someone was worried about me, that I was forgetful, that living alone wasn't safe, that I had once left the door unlocked, once forgotten to turn off the stove. None of it was true. I stood there for a long moment, holding a letter in my hand. When they realized I was there, both women fell silent. One of them forced a smile, and then they hurried away. On the way home, I tried to reassure myself that maybe people were genuinely concerned, but what I felt wasn't care. It was the feeling of being looked at differently. That evening, I called Evan. I told him what I had heard, keeping my voice calm, not accusing anyone. Evan was silent for a moment, then said that Lena was just worried about me, that perhaps people had misunderstood. He told me not to think too much about it. "But do you think I'm forgetful?" I asked. Evan hesitated. Just a little. But I heard it clearly. He said that everyone forgets things from time to time, and that it's a regular part of life. The call ended shortly after. I set the phone down and sat still in the living room, looking out the window. For the first time in a long while, I felt as though I had to prove that I was still myself. That night, I cried. Not out of fear, but out of sadness. Sad because my words no longer carried enough weight. Sad because my son, the person who had trusted me more than anyone, now hesitated. I wiped my tears, went back to the kitchen table, and checked every lock, every switch, as if I needed to reassure myself. Not to put others at ease, but to keep myself from starting to doubt who I was. From that moment on, I understood that I was being pushed aside, little by little. No one said it outright, but everything was happening nonetheless, and I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would do it for me. A few days later, a strange envelope appeared in the mailbox out front. The name on it wasn't mine, but the address was correct. Printed on the envelope was a name that sounded very familiar, as if it belonged to my family, yet I had never seen it on any official paperwork before. I took the letter into the kitchen and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from an asset management company in the city. They thanked me for reaching out to inquire about asset and property arrangement services. I read it over several times, sure that I had never called, never sent an email, never signed anything related to this. My heart began to beat a little faster. I set the letter down on the table and looked around the familiar kitchen. Everything was still there. The teacup, the notebook, the things I use every day. Nothing had changed, but I knew something was happening behind my back. I took out the stack of papers Lena had brought before and flipped through each page. I didn't understand everything, but I started noticing the places that required signatures, as well as the lines about representation rights and management authority. At that moment, I realized something very clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't excessive concern. This was a plan prepared step by step, slow enough that I wouldn't notice right away, but solid enough that if I slipped, everything would move beyond my control. I didn't call Evan. I didn't call Lena. I sat quietly for a long time, thinking about what I needed to do next. I wasn't angry. I wasn't panicked. I simply knew I had to act, this time for myself. That afternoon, I pulled out an old address book and looked up a name I hadn't contacted in years. Someone I had once relied on when buying this house. Someone who had handled every document clearly and straightforwardly. I picked up the phone and called. "I need to see you," I said when the other end answered. "As soon as possible." After hanging up, I looked at the letter once more, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I knew that from this moment on, nothing would be simple anymore. But at least I had seen what I needed to see. The law office was on the second floor of an old building. Nothing remarkable about it. I had been there, a few times before, when I bought the mountain house and handled some paperwork. The woman who met with me that day was just as I remembered her. She spoke little, listened a lot, and never rushed to conclusions. I told her everything, from Lena's visits, the stack of documents placed on my kitchen table, to the rumors spreading around town and the letter I had just received. I didn't embellish anything, nor did I hide my feelings. I simply told her exactly what had happened. She didn't interrupt. She just took notes. When I finished, she looked up and asked a very simple question. "Have you signed anything?" "I haven't," I replied. She nodded. "Then there's still time." She explained in plain terms that what I was facing wasn't uncommon. Some people start with concern, then gradually create the impression that the property owner is no longer capable of making decisions. If that story is repeated often enough, people begin to believe it's true. "I don't want to make a big deal out of this," I said. "I just want to protect what's mine." She looked at me for a moment, then said, "If you want to protect it, you have to prepare. And sometimes, preparation means not reacting right away." Her plan was very clear. First, I needed to place the house and my assets into a form of protection that others couldn't easily interfere with, not to transfer them to anyone, but to keep control firmly in my hands. Everything would be done quietly, fully legal, slow enough not to draw attention. "And Lena?" I asked. "Let her think you're still considering," she replied. "Don't confront her, don't refuse outright. The closer someone thinks they are to succeeding, the more careless they become." I listened and understood clearly. This wasn't about retaliation. This was about standing my ground. Before I left, she advised me to document every interaction, keep all paperwork, and if possible, record important conversations. Not to make trouble for anyone, but so that when needed, the truth would have something to stand on. When I stepped out of the office, the city was as noisy as ever. But inside me, there was a different feeling. Not anxiety, but clarity. I knew what I needed to do, and more importantly, I knew I was no longer alone in this. I did everything very slowly, not out of hesitation, but because I didn't want to create any unusual signals. I still answered Evan's calls as usual. I still spoke to Lena in a calm voice, neither refusing nor agreeing to anything clearly. I simply said I needed more time to think. One evening, I called Evan and told him I planned to leave the house for a few days. I said I wanted to go into the city to visit an old friend, to change the scenery a bit. Evan sounded relieved. He said it was a good idea, that I should get out more. I hung up and sat quietly for a long time. I knew that this information wouldn't stop with Evan. The next morning, I packed a few simple things. I didn't take much, just enough that if someone looked, they would believe I was truly going away. I drove out early, went down to town, parked the car at a friend's place, then came back by the trail behind the house. The house looked dark and silent, just as I wanted. Inside, I drew the curtains tighter than usual, turned off more lights. I didn't move around much. I wanted the place to look abandoned. Those days passed very slowly. I ate simply, read to pass the time, and occasionally checked what I had prepared. I wasn't anxious, but I wasn't relaxed either. It felt like I was waiting for something inevitable to happen. I didn't know exactly what Lena would do. I only knew that if she truly believed I was no longer here, she wouldn't wait long. And I was right. By the third day, everything was still quiet. Then, early in the afternoon, I heard a car from a distance. Not the familiar sound of a neighbor's vehicle or a delivery truck. This sound was slow and deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I stood still in the room, looking through a gap in the curtain. Lena parked right in front of the porch. She got out alone and looked around carefully, as if making sure no one was there. She didn't call my name. She didn't knock right away. She tried the front door handle, locked. Lena stepped back, frowned, then walked around to the side of the house. I heard the side door being tested. Still locked. She went back to the car, opened the trunk, and took out a small box. I recognized it immediately. It was the box I had once hidden near the shed where the spare key was kept. I hadn't touched it in months. I had never mentioned it to anyone. Lena opened the box, took out the key, and inserted it into the lock. The door opened. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and stood still for a moment in the living room. There was no polite smile anymore, no hesitation. She looked around slowly, like someone who had the right to do so. "Finally done," she said softly enough for me to hear through the recording device. Lena went into the kitchen, opened the drawer, and looked over the papers I had left on the table. She picked up an envelope, skimmed it, then smiled. Not a happy smile, but a satisfied one. She took out her phone and photographed every corner of the house, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. I realized she wasn't searching for anything. She was documenting, like someone preparing to take over. When she passed the dining table, Lena stopped. She placed her hand on the tabletop and said very quietly, "You've had enough time." That sentence sent a chill through me, not because I was afraid, but because it confirmed everything I had suspected. Lena stayed in the house for nearly half an hour. When she left, she locked the door again, carefully put the key back where it belonged, and drove away as if nothing had happened. I remained still until the sound of the car disappeared completely. When everything fell silent again, I finally exhaled. I knew I had everything I needed. Everything had been recorded. The sound of a moving truck echoed up the gravel road while it was still barely light out. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 5 in the morning. The security alarm sounded, short and sharp. The phone on the table vibrated immediately after. The guard called, his voice more urgent than before. "Ma'am, your daughter-in-law is back. She has a moving truck and several people with her. She says the house has already been transferred, that you agreed to move out." I sat up and put on my robe. My voice remained calm. "Let them in, and make sure you record all the information." Outside, I heard car doors slam and hushed voices. Lena stepped onto the porch with confident strides, as if everything were already in her grasp. She told the people with her not to worry, that all the paperwork had been taken care of. When the door opened, Lena walked in first. She turned on the lights, went straight into the living room, pointed toward the large furniture, and signaled for them to begin. No questions, no hesitation. "Let's move quickly," she said. "I want this done before noon." One of the men looked around, clearly uncertain. He asked whether the homeowner knew about this. Lena pulled a stack of papers from her bag and held it up in front of them. "I'm the homeowner," she said. "Everything is legal." I stood in the bedroom, hearing every word clearly. I didn't rush. I was simply waiting for the right moment. When the guard and the police arrived, the atmosphere in the house changed immediately. Voices lowered. Hands stopped moving. Lena turned around, a flicker of confusion crossing her face before she quickly regained her familiar confidence. The police asked to see the documents. Lena handed them over, explaining that I had transferred ownership, that I no longer lived there. She spoke smoothly as if she had rehearsed it. The officer examined the papers, then looked up. "Ma'am, according to our records, this house is currently protected under a legal agreement. There is no valid transfer of ownership on file." Lena froze. "That's impossible," she said. She signed. "Where is she now?" the officer asked. I stepped out of the bedroom slowly without making any noise. When Lena saw me, she stood rigid, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. "Are you looking for me?" I asked evenly. "This is still my house." Lena stammered, trying to say that I didn't remember what I had signed. I looked straight at her, neither angry nor raising my voice. "I remember very clearly," I said, "and I never gave you permission to enter this house." No one spoke for several seconds. The movers stepped back, avoiding my gaze. The police asked Lena to step outside so they could sort everything out. This time, she had no way to protest. As they took Lena away, the day finally broke. The morning sunlight streamed through the living room windows, falling on the furniture still in its original place. The house returned to its quiet state, as if it had never been disturbed. I stood there and took a deep breath, not because of victory, but because at last, everything had been put back where it belonged. Evan arrived late that morning. He stepped into the house with a worried look, glancing around the living room as if searching for proof that what had happened was real. I brewed coffee, set 2 cups on the table, and sat down across from him. "Where's Lena?" Evan asked. "She won't be coming back here," I said. "At least not for a very long time." Evan looked at me, waiting. I didn't rush. I told him everything, from the stacks of papers on the kitchen table, the words that sounded like concern, to the time Lena entered the house believing I had left. I spoke slowly, without blame, without added emotion. I simply told the truth. At first, Evan shook his head. He said there must have been some mistake, that Lena couldn't have done such things. I didn't argue. I showed him what I had kept. Evan was silent for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't listen to you." I placed my hand over his. "You don't need to apologize for trusting someone you love, but next time, if you see me staying silent, ask why." Evan lowered his head. He said that all this time Lena had been telling him I was changing, that I was forgetful, that I wasn't as clear-minded as before. He hadn't known what else to do except trust the person who was beside him every day. "Family isn't a place where you have to choose sides," I said. "Family is a place where you have to listen." We sat there a while longer, saying nothing. There was no need to say more. This silence was no longer heavy. It was the silence of understanding, of something finally being named clearly. When Evan left, he turned back and hugged me for a long time. That hug was nothing like the rushed ones before. It was slow and real. I knew not every crack disappears immediately, but at least we had found each other again. After that, everything unfolded quietly. Lena had to face what she had done. There was no spectacle, no public arguments, just meetings with lawyers, paperwork reviewed again, and decisions made according to the rules. She no longer contacted me, and she no longer appeared in town. It took Evan a long time to accept the truth. He no longer defended Lena, but it wasn't easy to let go of the image of the person he had once trusted. I didn't push him. I knew some lessons had to be walked through alone. Gradually, Evan returned to old habits. He called me more often. He came up to visit on weekends. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but we both understood that a boundary had been reset. As for me, after everything, I realized I wasn't the only one who could fall into such a situation. Many people live alone, have assets, and are often viewed with suspicion instead of respect. I began sharing my story with others in town, not to complain, but to remind them that everyone has the right to make their own decisions, regardless of age. I helped them better understand paperwork and how to protect what they had spent a lifetime building. Not everyone needs a complicated plan. Sometimes just knowing when to ask the right question, when to pause before signing a name, is enough to avoid regret. Experiences like this didn't make me bitter. On the contrary, they made me value clarity. Value relationships that don't need to be proven through power or control. That morning, I was sitting on the back porch again with a cup of tea. The mountains were still there, unchanged. A light wind moved through the trees, carrying the familiar scent of damp earth. Everything looked exactly as it had before this story began, except that I was a little different. I didn't think much about Lena anymore. Some people enter our lives to teach a lesson, then leave. What matters more are the people who stay and how we treat one another after everything that has passed. Evan texted to say he would come up for dinner that weekend, bringing fresh fish he had just caught. I smiled when I read the message. No need for many words. It was enough to know we were finding our rhythm again. Family, in the end, is not a place to control or possess. Family is where people are heard, trusted, and respected, at any age. If this story makes you think of your parents or of an older person living alone, give them an extra call, ask a question, and truly listen. Sometimes, the right kind of care can protect them better than any document ever could. And if you see yourself in this story, remember this. You have the right to protect what belongs to you, and you don't need anyone's permission to do so. I took a sip of tea, watched the sunlight spread across the mountainside, and felt a deep sense of calm. If you find this story worth reflecting on, please subscribe to the channel to hear more stories about family, justice, and respect for older people. You never know. One of them might arrive exactly when you need it.